Good evening, everyone. Since we don't have a chair or a vice chair, and that's on our agenda to address tonight, I've kind of taken on my shoulders to just get the meeting started. So I'd like to call the meeting of January 22nd to order. Um, And first, second item on the agenda is to approve the agenda. Do I have a motion?
Motion to approve.
Second it.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
I'm abstaining because I
Um,
wasn't here.
Um, Next item is to approve the minutes from the prior meeting of December 11th. They have gone out to us by email, and we should have a desk copy in front of us.
Oh, excuse me. Let me go back. I'm sorry. You were approving the minutes. I
Yeah.
was going on the minutes of December 11th. So I will take that abstention away. Vote approval of the minutes.
Any comments on the minutes? Or if there's none, is there a motion to approve?
I'll make a motion to approve the minutes from December 11th.
Is there a second?
Us.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
And I will abstain the minutes of December 11th.
Motion carries. Okay, now we get to the new business. So we can get a chair at this point. Next item is item 4A, nominate and elect the chair for the membership of the Planning Commission. Do I hear any nominations?
I'd like to nominate Robert Gray as the chairman, the new chairman for the Planning and Zoning Commission.
Is there a second to that
I
nomination?
will second that motion. That nomination, I should say.
Are there any other nominations for chair? Please, somebody. Hearing no other nominations, all in favor of the motion, say aye.
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 Opposed? Like I'm the one in the barrel.
Congratulations.
Um, Or condolences or something. Item 4B, nominate and elect vice chair. Is there a motion for a vice chair?
Mr. Chair, I would like to nominate our friend over here, Mr. Larry Brown, as vice chair.
Is there a second to that?
I'll second.
Any other nominations for vice chair? Nominations are closed. All in favor of the motion to nominate or to elect Larry Brown as vice chair, say aye.
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 Opposed? You're number two in the barrel.
Okay.
Okay, those were now I guess we can conduct official business. Next item, and really the only substantive item besides the elections, was an update on the comprehensive plan. We had an electronic memo sent to us electronically by our planner, Chris Jakubiak, and there's also a desk copy of that in front of us. I saw that there was some inquiries from one of the planning commission members, which via email, which Chris answered. Chris, you want to go forward and explain what's going on with the comprehensive plan?
Yes, I thought perhaps the changing of the guard would be a good time to pause a little bit and refocus on the comprehensive plan. And I thought since we didn't have a full agenda, it might be a good time just to refresh everyone's memory where we've come and what work we still have to do over the. So you might remember we addressed the first three chapters in one document, chapters 1, 2, 3. One was an introduction, 2 was economics, demographics, a little bit of economics, income, just really the population, the character of the population of the town. Chapter 3 was a municipal growth section, which is not completed because we can't complete it until we go through other stages of the work. But the gist of it was the growth that has happened in the town over the years. And one thing you don't see in that chapter, which you typically see in a municipal growth chapter for any other community in Maryland, is that there's no plan for annexation or outward expansion of the town. That could be in here, but that's really wasn't part of the last comprehensive plan, and it's not part of this one in the sense that there's little opportunity for expansion of the municipal boundaries, just because we're generally hemmed in by the bay and by land that's been preserved, by municipal borders on the north side, and developed land around the perimeter of the town. So there's the thinking then as municipal growth is really about redevelopment and infill and the stuff that's been happening gradually over time, and the continuation of that type of pattern, not major subdivision development. I think after these subdivisions that are ongoing now are completed, that I don't know that there's going to be any more major subdivision development in the town. Could be wrong, but I don't see it on the horizon in the foreseeable future.
Well, as I understand it, there isn't any significant parcels of land left to develop within the town.
Very little. There's probably one potentially significant parcel, but it doesn't have the zoning to allow really serious development, and it's highly sloped and require a great deal of it would be almost like the heritage in terms of its impact on the environment, in terms of mass grading necessary to make it happen. And yet the zoning is not there to develop at that density. So having said that, that is one of the parcels, and it's along the sort of the ridge that wraps around this bowl that we sit in, going out under Cox Road and out to Bayview Hills and Richfield Station, that whole hillside there. The land use plan recommends that be a resource conservation use because of its environmental sensitivity. So it would take it out of the inventory of developable land, which would probably reduce the build out of the town by 50 units or something like that, ballpark. But that's all that was the municipal growth section. And the key there was to understand how many dwelling units could be built under today's zoning realistically in the town. And that number that I computed was 315. So that means that without any changes to existing zoning, about 315 new housing units could be built within the town.
Do we know what North Beach's plans are for municipal growth? Do they have any?
I don't think they have any. I don't know exactly. I haven't seen their latest plan. But I
Also wonder what basically it's county beyond the town limits, what the county has planned or contemplating in the areas surrounding the town.
You'd have to go quite a distance. Most of the property, almost all, is already developed in low density suburban type of development, well and septic, large lot, 1 and 2 acre lots. And the balance is in land preservation, substantial. The John Ward Farm is substantially large, and on our western edge, all in land preservation. In fact, we have a map of that in the old plan, and I'll bring it to you at some point, just to give a sense of how we're kind of constrained by those things. However, the county's land use plan, in its comprehensive plan, does make note that development can take place where there's water and sewer capacity. And the county does have sewer capacity at the wastewater treatment plant. So conceivably, they could promote the redevelopment of low density areas or promote the infill of low density areas outside the town and extend water and sewer to it. And they write the water and sewer master plan. They have a right to a certain number of EDUs or equivalent dwelling units in the wastewater treatment plant. So it is conceivable that development could happen on the fringe of the town, but I don't think so in the foreseeable future, but that potential is out there. The previous plan was much more specific about, not growing anymore up in this area. I think this plan is a little more pro-growth in that respect. Nuanced, but it's there, so it's a potential.
The other thing that was briefed to us, at least, by the Walkable Communities Committee was the potential there on the south end by Brownies Beach, that area, which is outside the town limits, as I understand it, and is, I would think, something for potential annexation.
Well, actually, that large tract of land is within the municipal boundaries. We've often referred to it as the panhandle for the town. And so we have Brownies Beach, then here, and then a long parcel with shoreline frontage. It is within the municipal boundary of the town, but it's in a highly restrictive zoning category owing to its resource attributes. In fact, there's it's a natural heritage area, and there's two species that a fern and some kind of insect, beetle, that are rare and perhaps endangered. So no, it's in the town already.
Okay.
But development potential in there is very, very limited. They'd have to consolidate at least 20 acres to get one unit under the critical area laws.
I'm not thinking of developing it. I'm thinking more of it as the park or
Yes, right.
parking for Brownies Beach and that area.
In fact, we have talked about that as a possible element of the comprehensive plan, recommending to the town to consider acquisition of that as an extension of the parkland area of the town. I believe, Laura, you were on the commission when we talked about that. Do you recall that?
I presented that,
Okay.
yes.
But Jonathan was not. So I just want Jonathan to be aware that that was an element that we had talked about. We've not come to any sort of recommendation, but that was something that we were asked to consider as a element of the comprehensive plan.
Have there been any updates on the 261 improvement for the, is that the State Highway Administration helping us with that?
On what part of it?
I guess the sidewalk from the school.
Sidewalk connection.
Yeah.
I don't know the latest on that, but we can check. Has anyone been to a town meeting recently? Usually Paul Woodburn will give a report on it. Have you? So I don't know the current status of that.
I think I saw that they were planning on possibly putting an overpass there and having a walkway to the beach under the overpass. Was that a possibility? And having parking on this side of the overpass?
Pedestrian overpass? Is that
I
what you mean?
think you might have seen that presented as an idea, but I don't think that is the plan that is going forward right now for that sidewalk. Are you
Okay,
talking about
yeah.
the sidewalk from Chesapeake Village to,
To Brownies Beach.
from
Oh, well, the cars would be going over the overpass and then the pedestrians would go under the overpass to the beach.
Yeah, my recollection was the Walkables community, and that would, if you haven't seen the presentation, I believe it's available. But that was one of the ideas they had proposed, is linking that to the rest of the community with walkways and pathways, which would include some sort of overpass or underpass to reduce the hazard to people trying to cross 261.
Yeah, I remember seeing that. I thought it was a good idea.
We did a chapter on the natural environment. Under state planning law, towns and counties have to address what is called sensitive areas, and those are wetlands and floodplains and shoreline, steep slopes and forests, natural habitat for wildlife. municipalities can propose how they want to address them, but they have to address it. The plan typically is about protecting them from the impacts of development, either with recommendations for new regulations, for instance, on steep slopes, or changes in the zoning category to place them in a category where development will not impact the resource. And the town has been really successful in doing that over the years, generally with the exception of the steep slopes. It was about 2 decades ago the town added the resource conservation zoning district and applied it to that panhandle and a number of other places in the town, which basically took development potential out of that area permanently. And this proposal in the land use section recommends doing that in a more targeted way as well moving forward, picking up a number of areas that could link up forested areas and open spaces, especially when those areas are very steeply sloped. And you might think that no one would ever build on these areas. I mean, they're zoned for residential, no one would ever build. But I field questions frequently from people who are like, I'm considering buying this, and what's the development potential here, and can I make access connection here? And people try to figure it out and are actively working to develop areas where all common sense and good policy suggests shouldn't happen. But as you know, where there's a market, people will find a way. And some of those lots can be some of the most beautiful lots ever because of the topography and the views of the water and the streams below and all that. Current regulations, whether critical area or town zoning, don't prohibit the use of property for residential. They just limit the impacts, mitigate the impacts, but they don't limit or prevent a house being constructed on a steep slope, for instance. And we didn't mention the vision. Jonathan, there's a vision statement. Did you read that in this memo? It's kind of important to reconnect with that. And I won't read through it all, but that came out of 2 public work sessions we had in the beginning of the process. And we sort of tested this vision going back to the community. We did a survey based on this, and we really felt we've got a pretty good, solid base to build a plan on. So that I just wanted to call your attention to that.
Yeah, I did. I took the survey, and
you did?
it looked like a lot of people agreed on most of the stuff. Like it wasn't too divided. A lot of people in the town seemed to agree on what they wanted. So I thought that was good.
I thought so too. So then there's natural resources chapter. The biggest element of that is sea level rise concept and issues, and really documenting the extent of sea level rise. And for a while, all we had was the inundated areas, assuming a 2.1 foot sea level rise, and then long-term, a 5.7 foot sea level rise, which is 80 years into the future, and much less perhaps accurate in its where you draw the line. But certainly the 2050 number seems to be very accurate, and multiple agencies have predicted. The predictions have sort of centered on that 2 foot increase, and it's certainly good enough to do a decent plan on. So that's a really meaningful level of, or meaningful line in the town's landscape where beyond it, it could be protected from sea level rise. But on the other side of it, the water side of it, it's going to be impacted unless structures are built to divert and protect and hold back the waters. But then we had a breakthrough and with the state and with our GIS folks, and we began mapping what would be the flooding that's associated with this higher sea level rise. Because if the Chesapeake Bay's waters are higher than they are now by 2 feet, the floodplain, which is on the landscape, is going to extend further away from the water, and it's going to be deeper when it floods. And that's pretty powerful stuff to understand that. And so we did the mapping, and right now Chesapeake Beach is the only community in Maryland that's done that type of mapping. In fact, the Maryland Department of the Environment, Natural Resources, and the Critical Area Commission want to come down and meet with you, to talk with you, part to give you a high five for thinking about this, because they are thinking about how we grapple with development in these areas that have always been developed, but are going to be dealing with sea level rise, because their way of regulating development doesn't make sense anymore. For instance, to require someone to build these technical mitigation projects, sand filters, and even do planting and bioswales seem fine now, but they fail when groundwater levels start popping up and water starts breaching bulkheads, and the land subsides. So they're trying to figure it out, and they actually invited me to a meeting in Annapolis to sit down with them. I talked with them about what you've done so far in these mapping techniques, and I gave them a draft of that chapter that describes potential ways of addressing this long term. And they would like to come down and I think, one, to encourage you to continue this thinking, but also just engage with the town and see what resources they can provide to Chesapeake Beach to
I
deal with
think
this
that's
issue.
a huge opportunity
Yeah.
for
I showed them,
us.
I'm sorry. I showed them some of those images of the kind of blue-green parks, both the natural and the water and the parkland type of concepts. And they're thrilled by that. They also know that to allow one property owner to raise land or raise bulkheads without thinking comprehensively about what the adjoining property owners are doing is a recipe for a lot of problems in the future. So Mr. Chairman, I would like to send an invitation, actually. if the
Actually,
planning commission
there are a
wants to.
couple, I have a couple suggestions for some upcoming meetings that I would like to see,
Okay.
that being one of them.
Fantastic.
But I can get to that at the end.
Okay, good. Under land use, the draft land use section grouped recommendations around 4 major topics or themes. One was adapting to sea level rise. One was the conservation and improvement of the existing neighborhoods. Those are neighborhoods that have been platted here for hundreds of years. The middle subdivision in particular, but also the lots that are along the bayfront, working all the way from up north, all the way down south. Commercial mixed-use centers, because the economic development of the town is an extremely important aspect of this project. And we've recognized early on that we may not have the amount of commercial space that's positioned and ready to go to capture any real commercial services that people said they wanted. And some of our commercial space is a bit outdated and obsolete. Then the last one was parks and recreation, and particularly open space and development of our open space, because we recognize that and we actually presented this 2 months ago, we're really deficient within certain categories of open space, like general neighborhood parks and tot lots and small scale parks. We're just nowhere near any national community standard in that respect. That's why I was glad that you missed it. The Planning Commission approved a plan that would create a small park at
Perfect.
yeah,
Where?
right up there by the what's
Richfield
Crestview,
Station.
Crestview Extended, Richfield Station.
Perfect.
The last group of townhouses will
Perfect.
have its own park, a tot lot park, protected by a shrub buffer, trees, a light, and a couple benches. Just a fence.
So the HOA agreed to that.
Well, funny you should ask. We haven't heard yet.
Oh, okay.
But so this matter's been referred to the town manager to facilitate.
Is that a town sponsored or a HOA?
Well,
sponsored?
HOA, it's
Oh, okay.
HOA land. It was intended to be HOA land anyway. It would have just been your typical open space, grass and a couple trees, open space between buildings. And so this is potentially increased maintenance responsibility.
Well, as I recall, it was slightly different than that. Initially, there was a central pumping station planned for this parcel of property. The developer asked us to amend the plan to remove that central sewer pumping facility to allow individual grinder pumps in the houses.
I read that.
And we
yeah.
approved that, which left this open space where the central pumping station would be to be vacant. And that was now going to become a tot lot park type of thing. But then that would be then conveyed to the homeowners association. The issue I had at that point was whether the homeowners association had agreed to whatever that minimal increase in responsibility would have been. And that's why I conditioned the motion the last time that they get HOA approval for that maintenance of that tot lot.
That usually takes a 2/3 vote, doesn't it? I know I've dealt with that in HOAs, and that usually takes a 2/3 vote.
It depends on their own
Because that's an
individual
increased
bylaws.
assessment usually. I've had to go through that myself, so
But
I don't know.
we have informed them with a long
hopefully
email
they'll-
and images and documents.
That's
We just haven't
wonderful.
heard back.
Good. It's a great amenity. Good, good, good.
So in this brief memo, I just tapped on some of the highlights. The plan would reduce development potential in hillside areas and forested areas and areas that are subject to inundation. It would aim to create a town center that ties a revitalized commercial center along 260 into the center of town, near the town hall, sort of this area right out here, just beyond this wall. And it would allow housing of various building types and foster what I've called an eco-village model where natural resources and flood control are harmonized within the town center development. It would foster recreational and environmental resources at Kellums Field, and we talked about that as a major recreational destination. You know, it could be literally the Chesapeake Beach Water Park in a different way of thinking about it, right? I mean, because there's the water park, which is a fee for service, venue, but this is a park on the water, increasingly on the water. I included some images that sort of highlight and point out different types of land use changes that come about. And then the last thing is I commented on the fact that we still have a number of sections of the plan still to draft. The circulation or the transportation section, the community facilities, which is water and sewer and schools, parks, and the water resources, and then an implementation chapter, which is all about how we get this all done. And that chapter has to deal with regulations under state law. You have to deal with, you regulate, we're giving you the power to regulate development. Now's the time to tell the community what your goal is and how you intend to do it. And we could address this in very specific terms, or we can do it broad brush and say, the following types of regulations ought to be adopted. Communities do it in different ways, but we have to address land regulations.
I have a couple questions. One is kind of just a time frame question. As I recall, it's either under state planning guidance or MD COMAR, Code of Maryland Regulations, that we have until 2022 to have a final approved plan. Am I remembering correctly?
Yeah, that is essentially right. The current plan was adopted in 2011, so 10 years from that is 2021. But the guidance from the Maryland Department of Planning to all state agencies or the groups, the municipalities in the state, is that they have until 2022, which allows them to take advantage of any census data that's made available in public by then. Most communities will take the current census data and projections and, come up with a reasonable approximation. But many
And
wait
that kind
until
of
the
gets to
census
my
data.
next question. We are about to, in the next month or so, next 60 days, enter into a new census period. First of all, is that information important? And if it is important, when could we expect to get any updated information on the census material for the town?
It starts really coming out in final form in about 18 months, I would say 10 to 18 months, particularly I'd say 18 months after the census is completed. But there is the American Fact Finder project that goes on. So the census continually updates and projects or estimates population and household data throughout the country. In fact, they continually ask municipalities in the county for building permit data. They analyze it, they apply statistical modeling, and they come up with a new estimate for every jurisdiction. But they're probabilistic estimates, so they show a standard error that's associated with each one. And those errors can be quite substantial when you start talking about a smaller town. The errors get really big, and we're talking sometimes at 22, 25% margin of error, which really begins to be unreliable to use. So there is real good
But
value.
would the census be any better? The final census
Well,
numbers?
yes, it is. It actually is better, according to their own statistical review, if you rely on that. Because they start to, I guess they have methods to estimate the standard error, and it's typically much smaller when the sample sizes are larger, and it's more a comprehensive study. But what's more accurate than all of that, in my view, is tracking building permits and actual development activity, which is really important. I mean, you still have to apply a factor for persons per household for the increment of growth to come up with a general number. But that 6,000 population figure for the town right now that we're using, I think is pretty much spot on. And 2,255 or 2,225 households, pretty good estimate for planning work. Now, the actual number may be 10% plus or minus, but it's good enough for what we need.
As we progress with the comprehensive plan, there's a couple areas that I'm not comfortable at this point, and I need more information. One of the first things I suggest when I came on the Planning Commission was that we have input from not only the citizens and the faith community and the town itself, but also from the business community. And we haven't had that yet. I'm wondering if there's a way we can approach the business community to get input from them to see what works for them also within the context and confines of where we want to go with the plan. Seems to me that that's it's a source of tax revenue, frankly,
Right.
and it's a source of vitality for the town that we really need to have something from, I don't know if the town business roundtable or some entity such as that,
Right.
let us know what's going on there. The other thing that I'd like to get some information on is that the town isn't an entity, is an entity of itself, but we're surrounded by, we're a neighbor to North Beach. We're surrounded by Calvert County. They're all going through their planning process. Seems to me there ought to be some sort of pollination between the ideas of the towns and the county, just to make sure that we're working, if not in tandem, at least working toward common goals and not divergent goals. So it might be important for us to have input from the other entities, the other municipal entities, as to where they're going with their plans.
Sure.
Those are the comments I had as to what information I think I'm looking for. Are there any other comments on or questions at this point? Larry?
Other than getting a dialogue between us and our surrounding communities, which I think would be very important. As you talk about the census, it'd be interesting to know what the census projected in 2010 and how that compares to what we think the numbers are now. How accurate, how much should we rely on that information? I don't know how difficult that would be, but it seems like a pretty simple thing since it's all the facts are there, just a comparison.
Well, so the census won't prepare a projection, at least at the municipal level. Maryland Department of Planning does projections for all the counties. And the Bureau of Economic Analysis that's affiliated with the census will do projections for at the county level. So we can look at the county levels to evaluate that consistency, but we can't really get to the municipal level to compare about projections. We can compare what the town projected for 2010 when it did its last comprehensive plan and see where we are. Or maybe even the county did a projection for the town, but I kind of doubt it.
It's a small point, just
Yeah,
a
it's
point of
interesting.
interest.
Lori, anything?
Yeah, I would be interested in kind of getting an overview of once we decide on the land use plan, I would like to know, kind of what is possible, and I'm talking legal, not hypothetical. What is possible? What kinds of things will we be obligated to approve? And what is not possible? So that we make sure that we're implementing the plan that gets us what we want. Because I see some things, I see some ideas communicated of things that we want, and then I'm not so sure that the plan that we're talking about necessarily gets us to where we say we want to go. So I would like to know, what would our obligations be as an approving body under certain things that go in the comprehensive plan? Because we can't just willy-nilly say no or yes. There is a certain degree of fairness and adherence that we'll have to oblige the people that come before us. So, I would like to know how we are getting, what position are we putting ourselves in with the constraints we lay out and with the leeway that we're laying out.
We get Jonathan first. Jonathan, any questions or comments?
Yeah, I didn't see much about tourism in the comprehensive plan. I know with the parking garage and some of the other things going on around here, the water park. I'm wondering how has that increased in the past couple of years? Do we project it to increase? What kind of revenue do we get from tourism? Is there anything we can implement to increase that? I saw some ideas about like water taxis or boat tours, or I think maybe thinking about ways we can bring people here for revenue might be something we could look at.
Cindy?
Going on the idea of census, also, do we have any way to monitor the summertime population opposed to the wintertime population? There is swell in the summertime. Do we have to account for increased traffic burdens, et cetera, during the summertime? I would assume we do, but how do we account for that? How can we determine what that number would be? I know that on my street, I have summer houses, winter towns.
Yeah, that's a great point.
So anyway, that's another concern going along with what Larry was talking about that we need to figure out. Is there any way to determine that?
Yeah.
For instance, you'll see that about 9% of the households or housing units in the town are vacant, according to the census. But are they vacant in the summertime? In other words, there's about 4 different reasons for properties to be vacant. Some are called seasonal housing, some are for sale, some are for rent and there's no one in there at the time, and some are dilapidated and can't be used. I think it's another category too. But if you look at that seasonal number and assume that they're actually occupied, then you can begin to understand what the peak season in-town population would be, assuming people aren't leaving for the summer, to go somewhere else. But, so that's one way that you can get at it.
I'm also seeing that we have a lot of VRBOs or VRBOs and Airbnbs. And I just wonder if we can determine how many are in that status as well, because that also probably even brings in more people, because you sometimes double the population at that point for each unit. So how do we determine that?
believe they're working on that, right?
Can we?
I think Connie Odell or somebody
they?
sent out email to the town asking if you have a rental to fill out this form.
Oh,
I actually have an
Rental units have to
Airbnb.
be registered with the town at this point.
should.
They're supposed to be registered.
Should.
Let's put it
Yes,
that way.
I actually do have an Airbnb. We rent out our room and I had to fill out that form. So I think they are starting to keep track of those.
Whether there's compliance or not is a different story.
Right.
And then I have another question. I know this is a little picky, but on the vision, going back to the vision statement you were discussing with Jonathan, I don't know, you did see this vision statement. It's a good vision statement, but there's just one word that I think we need to add, and it's just one of my little issues. And I don't know if anybody has that vision statement in front of them, but it talks about honoring the town's historic development while broadening citizen connection with and access to the scenic and recreational attributes that Chesapeake Beach is endowed with by virtue of its unique geography and natural setting. I would like to say, and protects access to the scenic and recreational attributes, because just honoring is a very vague term. And if we don't include protecting in there, we could lose, by nature of increased flooding or sea level rise, we could just lose the access to Brownies Beach or, some of our other recreational facilities. So I think we need to say protect access to the scenic and recreational attributes. Does anybody agree with me on that? Is that an important
agree with
term?
I agree with that as well.
So do you know where I'm talking?
Exactly know what you're talking about.
Okay, so it would be and protect access to scenic and I think that's really changes that a little bit. And then I also want to go to,
Oh, I'm sorry. Do you keep the word honor the town's historic?
yeah, I would,
and then
you could
say, "And
definitely
protect
keep the
access"?
honor the
Okay.
town's historic development, et cetera. But then when it comes to accessing the scenic and recreation, you have to protect the access to the scenic and recreational attributes. That's
Agree with you more.
important. The other thing is, I'm just questioning under your memorandum here, Chapter 1, Introduction. On the second page, page 2 of 8, it's in the middle, you have the introduction also elaborates on 4 major themes, which are the main ideas of the plan drawn from the initial public work sessions. Are the following then are the 4 major themes, but we have 5. So what are the real 4 major themes? Are they combined here somewhere and I don't understand it, or?
Should be 5.
Oh, so okay, so it's really 5 major themes. And when you talk about, okay, innovative public works, does that mean, what does that include?
For instance, if you're driving down Bayside Road and someone's waiting to cross the street, they can push a button and the crosswalk would light up.
Okay, you're just talking about enhancements to the public works that might, yeah, okay.
For the
Where would signage come into all this? Like if you want to develop a new signage program, where would that fit into these 4 major themes? Under any one of these categories?
That be more of a zoning issue rather than a comprehensive plan issue?
I think it's going to become part of the comprehensive plan at this point.
I had to say it's one of those. It'd be number 3, the third bullet, protecting, preserving the small town charm.
Okay,
I mean,
because I think that's going to be a huge issue that we've got to deal with in the next 5, I don't know, it should be sooner than later, but I say in the next 5 years.
When we talked about the walkable communities, a lot of that was signage and directing people in certain ways, and that might be in the building and interconnected town area too.
Right, I'm trying to figure, it could be in either one of those. I was just wondering if you had an idea of how that was going to be incorporated into this.
I hadn't thought about it, honestly, just yet.
Okay, because it should be put in here, I think. Personally, that's my opinion.
So we had a company come to us and they explained how there's ways,
When you say us, you mean your
the
HOA?
walkable community.
Oh, the community,
group,
okay, right. Uh-huh.
They explained how they would make some kind of guideline that says, what kind of light fixtures, what are the parameters? And it's kind of like, I can't remember what they called it, but it was an aesthetic guide that could go into the comprehensive plan that kind of described the parameters.
Well, I'm talking about an entire theme to the town that would, continue throughout. It would include on-off trails, it would, everywhere. It would just be incorporated with every sign in the entire town.
And also, I thought your large concern was also the commercial signage, that it be brought down.
Specifically the commercial
Right.
signage. I mean, it's a huge project and it's going to take a while and we have to put it somewhere into this program and hopefully get it towards the beginning of this next session of the comprehensive plan here because we got to get
Remember
that
why
done.
we stopped doing it? We were so close.
We
I thought.
had some interruptions and then this began. So we got to the first couple pages and ideas and we had to drop
That was
it.
a separate sign ordinance, wasn't it,
Yeah,
that we
we-
were addressing?
Yeah, it was.
It
So that was
was,
an ordinance outside of the comprehensive plan.
Yeah, it was.
at that time it was, but the way I see this, we need to have this as a major town theme, which really should be something the town council gets involved with. We have it's a real discussion. And it's not going to just be a couple months of, hashing back and forth. This is going to take a year of time to go through if you do it correctly. There's a lot to a sign program. I remember the last one I did was about 2-year program. But it incorporates a lot if you really sit down and think about it.
I think we need to get it into this plan because it
Definitely.
needs to be a policy that then we could follow up on,
Absolutely.
fund a program study or.
Absolutely. It's going to cost some money to do this. So that's got to be part of this plan. And new commercial development has got to be on board because everybody's going to have to, it's going to cost money for every commercial entity that comes in. It's going to be can't just put a little sign on the grass and that's it.
Are you talking about trying to standardize everything and-
Standardize.
and make it look nice?
Well, that would be the plan. That would be the goal.
Beautification,
Part of the beautification
Yeah,
process.
yeah.
But yes,
vibrancy.
it's.
I will email the word. There's a word that he used in the heading in his presentation. I can't think of it right now.
Okay.
But there was a name for it, and it's exactly what you're talking about.
Okay.
Something to, kind of control the aesthetic.
Well, it's a
nature
sign,
of
it's a sign
things.
program, but
Yeah.
signage program is, you can call it different things, but.
You have the sign program from the community or you were talking about? Or if you give
Oh,
me the
that
place,
was
I can
at
look
least 15 years ago. I'm sure I could dig it up. I could probably go
it
back
up.
to my
The
city.
basis for, because we could be more specific or less specific in the comp plan, but if we can point to something that, not a specific location, but point to, kind of frame out what it means
Oh,
in a very
okay.
clear way, we could
uh,
provide more guidance to the council.
Yeah, I could probably get a hold of something, sure.
Found that the more specific you get on some things,
Absolutely.
More
And
likely
we
they
shouldn't
are
have to
to get
reinvent the wheel.
adopted.
Yeah, exactly.
Any other comments?
Yeah, the chairman has talked about reaching out to the business community, and we've mentioned economic development, but economic development isn't fit in any of these 5 major themes. And I guess what makes me think of that is the economic engines right now in the community rely pretty heavily upon low-income employees and which require low-income housing to be viable for them. And that's something I don't think we've really tackled, is what to do with low-income housing. And that comes to mind in particular with this other package which we were given this week, and what's being built. Are we building towards that so that employees that we'll need for this economic engine are available?
These themes, they were taken from the public comments. Remember all those comments that were listed on the sheets. The main items that everyone, there was broad consensus on, we crafted a vision statement, but everything else we kind of grouped in under these categories. And the one that refers to the vibrancy of the community, that speaks to, and you can pull out all the examples in the people wrote, to creating more businesses that serve our local interests. So we don't have to drive to Dunkirk, or more businesses. So we'll have shops that can satisfy people who come to visit and stay with me. All this coffee shops and things that fit into a tourism network. And I was really encouraged to see that, because one of the first meetings that I actually had on this when we began this project was with Larry's Commission on Economic Development. And I thought they were very persuasive in saying we don't have much in the way of development potential or commercial uses here in the town, and recognize that as a major need for the town. The question is whether there be a separate chapter devoted to that topic entirely. It's not unusual for a town to have an economic development chapter. Chesapeake Beach never has. So my thinking was that you would read the land use section and see that the concerns of economic development were taken care of in the plan. But you can also have a chapter on economic development, set forth goals that say there should be adequate housing to support the growth of our tourism economy, for instance. And it's interesting, over time, more and more residents are staying within the town for jobs, which is suggesting that, in fact, people live here and are working here. And I think I quoted the number in that update. I don't know if it's, it's like 1 in 8 people or something right now, 12% or something.
I remember seeing that.
And certainly more staying in the county, which is all very positive.
I think if you're looking at a time frame of 2040, and I mentioned this early on, the technology is going to be so much different at that point that you're going to find more home work at home, where you're going to have distance working. So you have work for a company in DC, and they're going to have you work at home on that. It saves them money. It saves the commuting. It saves automobiles. We're going to have self-driving cars by 2040. That's going to change our whole transportation system by that time.
Right.
So I think that whole concept of economic development, it's not necessarily a standalone building with a commercial development in it. It could be a whole plethora of different ideas on there. And that's why I think it's important to get the business community involved.
Right.
Where do they see it going?
Okay.
Certainly I'm not an active business person anymore, so I don't know.
And there's a lot of overlaps between everybody's ideas here and economic development. There's the tourism component of it. There's how do you make a tourism economy thrive? Well, it's about signage and walkability signage, and it's about knowing where to go, where the business section is, or where any place that people might want to, where the park is, and all. So all of it ties into to economic development.
Any other comments, questions on where we're going?
I'd just like to second the notion of the ecotourism idea, and we're really focusing on town aesthetics, town parks, the town as a destination, as an economic development plan, as opposed to increasing residential density. I think we have the type of location that will allow us to really capitalize on our assets, and I don't think we can squander that by overdoing density.
Anything else from you, Chris?
Just to follow up on a couple of things. When I had mentioned that the state environmental agencies would like to come down, you said that there were a couple of other.
And I
referring
had
to
mentioned
these?
them, the MDE or state planning to come down.
Right.
I'd like to get something from the business community, have them come in in some manner or form to come
Okay.
in. I'd also like to have some sort of coordination between the jurisdictions.
And that could potentially be them sending representative here. To
Yes,
talk
just
to us.
have them tell us what they're doing. How is what they're going to do impact on the town? How is what we're doing going to impact on their entities?
Very good. And, you know, the county's finished its plan now, so I think they'd be happy to talk about it now that it's finished and wrapped up.
Yeah.
The
Okay.
pressure's subsided a bit.
So when we talk about building, is there a way to put into this comprehensive plan the ideas that the city, the town, has to also be responsible for purchasing land for parking, for more maybe park areas? How do we put that in there, that we have to say that the town is responsible for looking into purchasing any land that comes up that might be appropriate for these different public facilities?
So there's a chapter on community facilities, and that's where we make those recommendations. It could be, if there's consensus that there's a certain policy direction that everyone agrees on, we can actually be very specific. If it's not, we can simply say the standard that we recommend be achieved is a certain number of acres per 1,000 households. We are, 3,000 acres short of that. Therefore, we request a schedule of, capital improvements that consist of purchasing acreage over time.
Would
or
that include
improving existing
parking?
acreage.
Would that include parking? Would that be one of the things you would recommend as far as amenities?
I think if a town center concept, even if it's a small town center concept, happens over here, there needs to be a coordinated parking system. Oh, by the way, you may know that the town and the county have reached some accommodation on the Kellums Field area. We talked about that many times, and the county has agreed to transfer the property back to the town.
Wow.
And so that the town of Chesapeake Beach will own the entire
Oh, great.
open space there. It's
Yes.
not privately owned. So, which, really shows the power of your deliberations, I think, from the very
When will that
beginning.
happen?
There's a 60-day waiting period that's required by law before public can transfer property, public entities. And I think we're well into that now, or almost concluded.
Have a ceremony. That's
The county,
outstanding.
I think it was several weeks ago, the county voted to do that at the request of the mayor and council.
Wonderful.
So, which means that there's only really one main entity that owns all this open space, all this parking, the park, the dredge spoils area, the streets. So the town can perhaps engage in some master planning, thinking about its interest and as the main element, and not so much what the county might have in mind, which I think gives you a lot of flexibility for that town center concept and a great destination park.
And the water park remains a county facility.
Yes, the water park and the county. Well, it's a town facility, but it's county property. The town has a long-term lease. I don't know much more about it than that, but they have a long-term right to use the property in its current capacity. And the county owns the ground under the community center as well. However, just south of that is the boat ramp, which again is the town property. The travel way, the access way to get to these resources is the town property. So it's on that part of between the edge of the inlet and Maryland 261, just in that small area from the Northeast Community Center to the Gordon Stinnett, that's this overlapping of interest still between the county and the town. The town owns the roadways, the travelways. The county owns the property. The town has some lease or some agreement to use the water park. So everything else, though, is in the process of becoming much clearer in terms of ownership.
Chris, you had mentioned in near the beginning, talking about parks and recreation, the national standard for percentages. That would be interesting to have, how we compare to the national standard.
Send them to you.
There are no other comments on the comprehensive plan? One more? Okay.
While we're on this topic, remind me of what I have it. Maybe you brought up one time, Chris, the dredge spoils area and using those to our advantage and, incorporating that dredge area into something that we can use as a town, as a focal point. Maybe even additional, some kind of learning platform since we do all the CCPS or the field trips
Oh,
and all that stuff, if we could somehow figure out a way to tie the dredging into the learning process while making it nice for a park area. If somehow all of this can come together with some funding.
I mean, the dredging as a learning process, I mean, teaching what it is to dredge a harbor or inlet, like that process.
Like, take the dredge, you dredge in a way that is aesthetically pleasing, at the same time you put up little signs that say, this is what dredging is for.
Oh, I see. Interpretive signage and, yeah.
Not talking about a formal program to bring the schools in.
No,
Oh,
no.
okay,
not a-
all right. I
not
thought
a-
you were heading that way.
Don't ride the dredging boat.
Yeah.
I think North Beach did that when they
Right.
when they dredged. They put like a little sign up saying what they were doing and why.
also provides material that can be incorporated into flood management, berms and the like. So in fact, it's the areas that have been where dredge has been deposited that are high and dry forever, even through the 100-year projection of sea level rise, which is interesting to see how dredging the channel has created land that will be there for a long, long time, despite sea level rise.
Okay, let's move on. We have public comment. We have a member of the public here. Larry, do you have anything? No? Nobody else in the public here? Let's move on to, does any of the board members, do any of the commission members have any comments they'd like to make?
Just one more question. We are revisiting all of these chapters, correct? Before we put it out to the public. We're not calling chapters 1 through 5 a done deal right now.
Well, we're going to revisit in the sense that we have to ultimately accept and adopt a planning commission. We can always amend things as we go through.
Right.
I'm not sure we're going to have a formal presentation. Having a commission meeting dedicated to land use again, or unless it's the desire of the planning commission to do that again. But the question I would have to ask kind of rhetorically is how many times do we want to plow the field?
I would certainly like to request that. And if we're not, there are some things that we've discussed in previous sessions that I don't think we closed. One of them being one of your comments about the regulatory taking of the property. And there's just a few things that I feel like we could stand to go through this land use again.
All right.
That's my request.
The land use section is typically the one that is more iterative. It changes as you go through the process. As you, for instance, I'm going to be introducing some road concepts to you at the next meeting or sometime in the near future when we talk about circulation, which have land use implications. So we had, what does this do for our town center concept? Is this what we, might change things. We have a development proposal that's coming before you, right? At some point, whenever that thing is ready, which may shape how you deal with comprehensive planning for that area in the future. I mean, it changes, even the proposal itself begins to change how that area can be conceived as as the future of that area. And certainly if it's built, it's a new condition. So a lot of these things remain in flux until we get the document ready to go. And again, even then, your recommendation is this is good enough for us to take to the public. This may not be perfect, but it's good enough to get to the public and get formal comments going. And then you get it again and you review it, and you presumably will approve it. Your approval is just a recommendation essentially to the mayor and council for their adoption.
Any other comments before I ask for a motion to adjourn? For a motion to adjourn?
I'll second.
Moved and seconded. Anybody not wanting to adjourn, say so. We're adjourned.
Very good job, Mr. Chairman,
Yes.
Mr. Vice Chairman.
Thank you.